I call to order the November 4th, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. Let's start out with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now for the roll call.
Sure. Commissioner Campbell,
Present.
Commissioner Pearson,
Present.
Commissioner Stolarski,
Present.
Commissioner Willenbring,
Present.
and Chair Millis.
Present. Council Member Swedberg, do you have any updates for us?
Thank you. Just wanted to update you. We had that open house, and it was really good that we did. And we got some good feedback from businesses. In fact, that's why we ended up revising our language to allow the businesses not to, so they don't suffer if they want to sell or if they want to improve that area that they're in right now. So it became very important that we did that because we didn't want to box them in too much, you know. So it was very good that we had that open house. And the residents came and we heard them, and so we're trying to work out some things with them too. So, but anyway, I'm really glad we did it. So I don't know, I'll stand for any questions if anyone else has something you'd like to ask of me. And if I don't know the answer, I will get back to you. Going,
For me?
gone. You can talk to me afterwards too. Okay,
Sounds good.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Next, we have the approval of the minutes from September 2nd, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
I'm going to abstain because I was not here. So those in favor of approving?
Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Next up is going to be a discussion of the potential electric vehicle charging station amendments. Do you have a presentation for us?
I do. Thank you all for having me to join you guys tonight. I just wanted to say that my name is Shannon Reidlinger, and I've been with the city for about a year, so I'm sure most of us have not had the chance to meet, so I'm glad to finally be in front of you. All right, so in your packet of materials was included quite a bit of zoning updates and sample language, but I wanted to give you a sense for where this conversation is coming from with very, very high-level, fast context. So the discussion about amending Oakdale's ordinances to help become an EV-ready community really starts with the comprehensive plan. In Chapter 8, Goal 1, the city recognizes that greenhouse gas emissions negatively impact the climate and lays out a number of strategies that can help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. One of those strategies is understanding and addressing the contribution that the transportation sector has to greenhouse gas emissions. Now, statewide data shows us that the transportation sector accounts for almost a quarter of greenhouse gas emissions. At least it did in 2018. That number is probably still the same today. And you can see here in 2020 that almost 100,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions were emitted in Oakdale's city boundaries by vehicles traveling throughout the city. So it's not a small problem. And local, national, state, international policies increasingly mandating the transition to electric vehicles in order to, again, address the role that the transportation sector plays in greenhouse gas emissions. And the market is responding. Currently, there are 29 plug-in hybrid electric vehicles available and 20 all battery electric vehicles available to consumers to purchase. And in Oakdale and the surrounding region, our residents are increasingly responding to that availability. We can see here that there has been upward growth in the number of vehicles, electric vehicles, that are registered in Oakdale and the surrounding region. And we also have an increasingly large charging network to be able to charge these vehicles around the Twin Cities. So we know that EVs are coming. We know that more and more residents are purchasing EVs. And the city has a really unique role to play in becoming electric vehicle ready so we can support the residents and businesses in Oakdale that are hoping to transition to electric vehicles and away from gas vehicles. Now, again, the city does this in a number of ways, and at the beginning of 2021, I did complete an EV-ready community study to outline the different areas that the government specifically can play a role in becoming EV-ready. We've already addressed best practice number 1, which is policy, having EV language in our comprehensive plan, again in Chapter 8, Goal 1. The second area that we can lay a foundation for EV readiness is in zoning and subdivision ordinances. So the packet of materials that you have already received gives a pretty good overview of all of the different places where we could potentially make these ordinance amendments. All of these best practices come from a document that was compiled by the Great Plains Institute. So what I have done is more or less copy and pasted those best practices in here as an example of the ways that Oakdale could amend or update our ordinances in order to become EV ready. And what I wanted to do tonight was have a discussion with you guys about these best practices. I have not written exact ordinance language. All of these, again, are standards. We may decide that Oakdale is ready to address all of these standards, only some of them. That's, again, why I'm hoping to come to you tonight and get your feedback on these different areas. I will also lastly say that in the packet of materials that you received, within this table itself, the last column indicates sample language for some of these ordinance updates. The sample language that is in black comes, again, directly from that best practice document that was compiled by the Great Plains Institute. So that's language that other cities have adopted. St. Louis Park is in here a number of times as an example from the local region. The text that's in green was edited and compiled by my predecessor, Jen Hasbrook. So she has since moved on to Eden Prairie, but she left all of these edits to our ordinances as a place to start. So again, as you're looking at this table, that black stuff is examples from other cities. The green is something where a current or a former staff member has already drafted something up that we could kind of use as a launch pad. So what I'm hoping from you guys is for some direction here. I have personally never written zoning ordinance updates. I've never gone through that process before, and so I'm really hoping to use your expertise and guidance to help me decide where we should be focusing these amendments, what we should be including in the amendment updates and edits, just even places for more research or areas where we need to get a little bit more clarity on what makes sense the most for our city.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
if I may just add a little bit to Shannon's presentation. By the way, I'm Erin Perdue. I'm the interim city planner. I'm a consultant with Stantec, so I'll be here for a few months while we go through this process. I want to emphasize a couple of things. That all of the recommended language, or not even recommended, but the sample language that we're going to be talking about tonight is for the purpose of not requiring EV charging stations, but to enable them and to create standards if businesses or industries put in EV charging stations. So this is meant to enable, but not require. That's the intent. Also, as Shannon mentioned, we're hoping to get some policy direction from you, just in general, about where we want to go with this. Shannon and I would work together, based on our conversation tonight, to bring back some actual language for you to look at, hopefully at the December meeting, so we could continue this conversation. But this is a starting point, and we're interested to see what you think.
Does anybody have a place they want to start with what we have in front of us already? Do we want to just go through column by column, or?
So what you're looking for is this just for businesses, or are we looking, because it has, if
It's got-
you're getting ready to have like they're making the big 3M thing out there, have stations out there too, as when they're starting new areas of Oakdale, or what are you looking more for, just businesses, or are you looking for policies for homeowners also?
It's primarily for businesses. A lot of this has to do with if a business is interested in putting in their own charging station, then let's help them define what the standards are for putting that in place. If there is some development, like you've mentioned, where they want to be able to lay connectivity for future stations, then how do we make sure that there are standards in place for that? I would have to go through and see if we have anything specifically in the land use category about residential charging stations. So that might be a component, but I'm just a little less familiar with
I
that.
don't think right now that there's anything for like single-family homes or anything like
And
that.
typically, those users will put a charger in their garage.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
you know, it's specific to
But when
them.
you're putting your zoning rules and whatever, when you're building a new house, it's gonna take more than 100 amp service, or even more so, depending on how many cars they got. So they're gonna have to have that type of a service put in. So this has gotta be part of the language for the codes and that type of thing too. You have to consider that.
I
too.
have, yeah, so right now, I think at least in the scope that Shannon and I have talked about, we wouldn't be requiring homes to do that, although they certainly could. So if you would like to include standards for EV charging or EV readiness for new homes, we could look at that. Right now, we're not saying, okay, if you build a new house, you have to be EV charging ready. That's up to the individual homeowner.
Taking off on that, though, I'll offer one thing that I found out with a friend of mine who manages an apartment building, or townhouse, more than that. The people are putting it in their garages. They're pulling a separate line of their own through from their panel through their laundry room and pounding a hole in the garage just to bring the wire out there. The end result actually scares me in terms of fire code, safety requirements, and none of that's addressed in here, of course, because you really, like you said, you didn't really address residential. But as we put more emphasis on electric vehicles, people may be doing some very odd things that could be detrimental to their own safety,
And
especially if it's forced. And as you said, Teslas, for instance, require a 70 amp dedicated service. Most homes are 100, 120. So 70 amps is a significant increase on the infrastructure. And again, and not just here, but I haven't heard any good statement from Excel as to their readiness for more, X number of Teslas per block, and all of a sudden things come to a screeching halt.
I didn't see anything here differentiating if you're gonna put limits or restrictions on where level 3s can go, where level 2s can go. I mean, they're both really different, and I was wondering if there was anything to go about that. Also, I didn't see anything addressed in here about parking structures. I do not think personally that it's a safe thing for the fire hazard to have EVs in parking structures, so I think that's something that you need to look at too.
I would argue against that. I would take a different position than you. I don't see that as an issue myself. I think, frankly,
If you have a fire in one of these,
you have bundles of gas in all of these vehicles. So
right, but you
I hear you, and let me finish. I also think that's something that, there's fire code. We have a local fire department. They can certainly weigh in on that. Doesn't hurt to have the discussion, but I don't think at this point in the evolution of EV vehicles, that's of a concern, personally. I guess a couple of thoughts as I look through some of this. For me, it's about keeping this as simple as possible. So when we do things like, the installation of a EVCS shall not reduce the overall parking space area, dimensions, et cetera. It seems to overcomplicate the overall ordinance. We have ordinances on what size this parking space should be, whether it's, 9 by 18 or, whatever. I don't know that we, again, need to add more language that says, hey, just because you have EV, we're confirming that it doesn't need to be smaller, or has to remain the same size, I'm sorry.
I don't know if this is under our purview or not, but as far as our fire department, if EVs are gonna be growing as forecasted, is our fire department up to snuff on ways to deal with electrical vehicle battery fires? They're a lot different than gas engine fires. They can go on forever, they can restart, water can actually make them go off. What type of training has our fire department gone through for this influx that might be coming in? And I didn't see any safety concerns really addressed in here, aside from making it ADA accessible.
And I think that would be, I think this is just the implementation of like the physical infrastructure. That all gets handled in fire code and those regulations. One question that I had too, on page 2 of this ordinance, or this language rather, not an ordinance, for every parking space installed that has an EVCS, parking minimums can be reduced by half a space. Is the intent there to almost offer, it essentially becomes an incentive to the developer that, you know, if you put in an EV charging station, you don't have to have as many stalls. We're gonna give you this credit to reduce that number? Is that kind of the idea behind that?
Yeah, so I can't speak to the exact intent of this because Jen was the one that wrote it, but my interpretation of that is just to help them understand if you have specific requirements for your parking lot in general, here's how adding electric vehicle charging station spots into that will impact the requirements themselves. So I think it's more about clarity and less about incentivization, but that's just how I read it.
I can tell you as a developer who is going through this issue on many projects right now,
Yeah.
when I try and maximize a site, I personally and my company, we try not to put in EV charging stations. We don't want to have to spend that capital to do that. But that said, to have this type of incentive where I can save some parking stalls, which may allow me to get a little bit more FAR on the site, it's an attractive component.
If I might comment on that, one problem with that is that when you put in an EV charging station, you're taking up about a half a space just for the equipment and the clearance. Well, the Hy-Vee one over here does.
Yeah, but that's they don't have to be that way. You know, a lot of them that I've seen, the equipment is at the, you know, the front end of the car, sitting on the curb, you know, not taking up any of the lanes or the spaces.
Okay, along that, immediately over from that, it says the ordinance may recommend a decrease in the required parking minimum. One comment I've got on that is if this is acceptable, we should have lowered the requirements already, to be honest, just in general. And then back on the first page, EVCS, in my opinion, is not like a handicap parking, where we shouldn't be creating a new protected class. And so just taking up more desirable parking will simply encourage non-EV use of those spaces. And yes, I know later in the document you say, but ordinary citizens can't use those spots. That's where I have a problem with basic equity of this whole thing, because let's face it, a Tesla's $70,000 up here in the Nordland. Not many people can really afford it, even though they like it to. So this is the comment about we're creating a protected class here that I don't see a need for by saying people can't park here and we're going to take the more desirable spaces for them.
Yeah, I would echo that as well. I think you can probably just do away with that. I don't think you need to say where it's preferred to be.
The business owner may put it there just because it's where the electrical lines are going to go. That's another issue.
Exactly.
Then later on page 2, it says degree of flexibility or recommendations to reduce the cost burden. It's definitely going to increase the cost quite a bit. And then also, it says accessible EVCS over on the green area, about 2/3 of the way down on page 2. Accessible EVCS should not count towards the minimum number of accessible car and van parking spaces. This seems to increase the parking requirement, where just above we talked about lowering it, so it's an inconsistency in the policy.
Okay.
I've already gone through that one on equity. There's on the, just above development and construction, the last point on the previous section, determine if restrictions are placed on charging stations in the right-of-way. Why would we allow them to enter into the right-of-way that's kind of reserved for specific uses and protection of gas lines, water lines, things like that? So I'm not exactly sure why we would even consider doing something like allowing them in the right-of-way. In the development and construction, the first point, in order to proactively plan for and accommodate the anticipated future growth in market demand for electrical vehicles, it's strongly encouraged but not required. As you said, not required, but it has a feeling of required through it all. But this forces significant costs on business that may not want or even need to provide such amenities. And it is, you describe it as an amenity later on, I believe, as well. The last 2 points I had were, I think I've gone through one, no mention of the readiness of utility infrastructure to sustain the increased current requirements. How many Teslas per block can we allow or have before we've overloaded the transformer in that neighborhood? No mention of issues with retrofit of existing structures that may be forced to implement with electrical, structural, space, modification for safety, those kinds of issues. And I'll give you this so you've got it all, or can talk to you about it later if you wish. That covers all my points at least.
Yeah.
I think one of the other things that I'll just point out that in the land use section, I know this isn't perhaps the most controversial aspect of this, but we will have to make sure that we designate as an accessory use electric vehicle charging stations, just to be clear that we do allow them. And so that's a text amendment that would get incorporated if and when we do this.
One other thing, going back to kind of the theme that I had mentioned earlier, I don't know what page it is, but under the signage, safety, and other standards, item 1, EVCS shall have adequate lighting available for ease of nighttime use. Similarly, we have lighting standards across the site. Those should satisfy any need. So I don't know that we need to, again, overcomplicate it with EV-specific language.
Really good input.
Anyone?
Sounds like, yeah, there are a couple of things that we can research and follow up on. I think the issues that were brought up regarding safety in various ways, if not covered in this code, I think we can at least bring back some information about where it's covered, who's responsible for that, certainly.
I would add too, there were some comments about kind of the infrastructure's ability to support this, particularly electrical. I think it's less of a concern on new development because those plans are going to get reviewed by the electrical authorities. They're going to say, yep, we got enough power, we can supply this, we'll have will serve letters, that's all going to be covered. The concern comes as you start to go in and start to retrofit more and more of these businesses. Again, that's not something we can solve for. That's up to the utility to make sure that they have significant infrastructure. They should theoretically start to see that in their usage and know whether they need to upgrade service or, come in and make changes. But just a couple of points.
But it should be considered in a code situation. If you get a Tesla and you want to retrofit into your garage, you should have to go to the city and say, hey, I've got this car, I need to upgrade. I'm in, the Tanners Lake area, and it's all, it would be for the safety of it, of itself, because if someone tries to do this on their own And, you know, they have to upgrade their service, you know, if they've got less than 100 amps and by the time you get, like you said, it's gonna overload everything, and then 2 or 3 people in the block get it, and you're gonna overload the whole system. So, and this is the future, this is it, they want us to be this like in 2030, isn't it? That everybody's gonna have electric cars, one way or the other. That's what they're planning for, so that's not that far off, and, you know, we have a lot of older homes, and people are gonna start thinking this way and wanting to do this, and we should have some type of a code and responsibility to make sure that it's done correctly, you know.
I'm not certain, but I would imagine that our code requires any new service or upgraded service to pull a permit.
I was just going to say that, yes.
And so that's how the city would be able to
Okay.
enforce that.
Yep.
Now, does that mean everybody does it? No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
But
Well, in your own home, you know, it's.
And I think, you know, one aspect of this that we could bring back more information is what does the electrical code say right now in terms of EV charging? I don't know the answer to that, but we can find out.
And I will also add that, so this is just one aspect of an overall EV-ready community strategy. The administrative side of things, codes, permitting is another aspect of the strategy itself. So that is something that we're definitely looking into as this comprehensive plan unfolds.
were there specific questions you had that we didn't answer?
Not necessarily. I think you've all provided a lot of really good insight into kind of the stuff that's bubbled up for you. And that's really what I was looking for, is if I laid out everything that was in this best practice document, what is kind of calling out to you the most? And so I'm hearing a lot about making sure that we're just keeping language very clear, simple, looking at what's already in our code, and then evolving what exists today in order to incorporate EV language. I'm hearing stuff about the safety factor, whether or not that should go in the ordinances themselves. I think that this question about infrastructure is really interesting because I'm curious to understand from a research perspective how that all plays into our ordinances, knowing that obviously the city is not in charge of the utility itself. And so to what extent is it in scope to add some of that into the ordinances, and to what extent is that more about just as a community being able to keep the conversation rolling with Excel about what they're doing in order to make the grid ready for electric vehicles. So I have a number of key takeaways from this that I think I'm going to have to do some research on.
No, you're right that my comments about that would not fall into city code. It was in general.
Yeah.
EV readiness is a big topic. I've got vastly more questions about it than just this, but.
Yeah, I hear you.
Can I add one other thing? I'm struggling with it on other projects that I'm working on in my professional life. The recommended percentage of EV-ready parking spaces in structure type is X. This is not a requirement. Appreciate that it's not a requirement. One of the challenges is I work in projects that we're over 100,000 square foot in our buildings. We have 600 to 650 parking stalls. And when there's just this percentage that's applied to it, the ratios just, it gets out of whack. So at 600 stalls, I have a project right now, I have to provide 5% as EV, so it's 30 stalls. If I put 10 in, I'll be lucky if they're all full. So I think there needs to be potentially some consideration or plan as that square footage or as that stall count increases, that percentage may need to decrease.
Yeah. So having flexibility in the ordinance is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Along the line of what he was saying, in the times I've gone over by Hy-Vee, they've got the electric charging vehicle stuff over on the one side of the building. I have yet to see anybody actually using it, but a lot of people park there, myself included.
Anyone want to add anything else? Okay. Do you have an update for us then on?
Sure.
I do. I'll give you an update on a couple of things. As you know, the PUD ordinance was approved and the properties were rezoned. I am beginning to have some meetings with property owners in the area, particularly the one that was interested in developing multifamily residential. So I don't know when an application will come forward, but those talks have begun. For next month's meeting, we do have an application from Hy-Vee to amend their PUD to include a permanent structure building for online grocery pickup. Right now, they have that temporary structure out there, so that'll be for you at the next meeting. We're also probably a little bit closer to getting an application for multifamily in the Helmo Station area, those R5 and R6 parcels that were being talked about. So you'll probably see that one before you see anything at the Greenway Station, but just to let you know, those are still under discussion and you'll see them sometime soon, probably this winter.
I am looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
A second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Meeting closed.